thought we'd take a little time today to talk a little bit more about the PPP program. First of all, many of you have received your PPP money, and congratulations on that. Other people are talking about getting their EIDL grants, and I know that that's happening this week as well. I'm seeing a lot of those come through. And some of the medical practices have received money from Medicare under the HHS relief program. So a lot of money is going into practices right now, and we've talked about the PPP tracker and how we're doing that. Today an email went out, so by the time you see this, you should have read that email that we set up a tracker for the EIDL money and also for the HHS money if you have any of that in your checkbook. And people have been saying, oh, I see you guys are making entries when it comes to the money and getting them into that restricted fund account, so to speak. That's happening as well, so beware of that. But today we just thought we would go through a bunch of questions. We've got about 26 or so questions that we're going to review together, and hopefully this will answer some of your questions that you've had. Clients ask a question, and I know that's a burning question for others as well. So we thought we'd just go through them. These questions will also be uploaded to the question and answer database that we've been keeping online for all of you. And those that have asked, we're responding back to you specifically as well, so that you get the answers to your questions. So hopefully that's helpful. For now, let's go ahead and dive into some of these questions. And Ben's going to start with the first three. I'll read them, he'll answer them, and then we'll flip back and forth. So here we go. Let's get started. All right, Ben, here we go. I received a $10,000 EIDL grant. May I use the money for whatever I want?
So this is a question that we've been getting a lot, and as folks know, the EIDL grant was supposed to be $10,000. Some have got less than that. And then once you get the money, the question is, how can I use it? And the EIDL grants can be used for payroll, meeting increased costs arising from supply chain disruptions, making rent or mortgage payments, and repaying obligations that cannot be met due to revenue loss. So you can use it for a lot of different things, a lot like the PPP money, but we're recommending that you use the EIDL grant for everything but payroll. And we feel like it just keeps it cleaner if you use the PPP funds for payroll and then use the EIDL grant for those other expenses that we just defined.
Number two, will the EIDL grant reduce my loan forgiveness?
So the EIDL grant will reduce your loan forgiveness when used for payroll.
Do I have to bring all my employees back to work as soon as I receive the PPP funding in my business checking account?
Right, so this question's come up a lot, especially for the dentists that are shut down and have now received PPP money, and they're wondering if, okay, now I've got my PPP funds, should I bring everybody back, or do I have to bring everybody back? And and our position on that, I think, is bring the people back when there's work to be done. And we don't think that Congress intended to provide these funds for you to pay staff to sit idle at home. So when you've got business to do, bring them back and bring back those staff that you need to perform the job. Otherwise, leave them on unemployment. So question 4, the PPP information sheet mentions restoring our full-time equivalent employment by June 30 to qualify for loan forgiveness. What does this mean?
Okay, that's a good question, and we have the same question here. A lot of those specifics for the forgiveness calculation are still being worked out, and we expect to see some guidance from the SBA soon on this. But just keep in mind that in order to get any kind of forgiveness at all, you have to retain your employees. So you're going to have to pay employees, right? We know that 75% of the money that we receive should be spent on payroll. Well, the program runs from right now anyway, unless they change this in the second round of the PPP money, which they're talking about right now, trying to put in place. But if they change the rules right now, it's March 1 through June 30th. So we know we have to hire people back by then. And that's kind of what I think this is getting at. It doesn't mean that, well, if I bring everybody back on June 28th, then all the money I spend is forgiven automatically. I think the banks are still going to, and the SBA will give us guidance on that. We'll be looking at full-time equivalents based on what you did in the 8 weeks and what you did prior to that on different periods, and maybe even after the 8 weeks, they might be looking at that as well. But as far as bringing people back, that's what they mean. And when they talk about full-time, they really are talking about full-time equivalent. So it's averages of employees, averages of wages, averages of total amounts as well. And they're going to look at those in the 8 week period, and then also what you did before. So that's really what that means when they're talking about that in that information sheet. But exactly how that works, it's not real clear. And so we're waiting for some SBA guidance on that.
So what can you use the PPP money for?
Yep. So if you've watched our webinars in the past, if you haven't, I would encourage you to do so. It's really the basic things are payroll costs, which would also include the health insurance and the retirement plan matches for employees, your interest on mortgage obligations if you own the building and you're a sole proprietor. It would include the and then make sure that that's all incurred, all those, the leases and so on, or the rent. The notes are due or have been due prior to February 15th. So you had them in place in the rent agreement. So rent also, utilities, again, all the utilities that were in place at or prior to February 15th, 2020. And just know you should be paying your expenses and your payroll like you normally would. We don't recommend that you accelerate your expenses or try to get extra amounts in there. Like we were talking earlier today, payroll, you're going to have probably 4 payroll periods. Well, that represents probably an average payroll if it's just like all your other payrolls have been. So in those 8 weeks, you're going to have probably 4 payrolls. You're going to have utility payments. How many? 2 for every, gas, electric, water, the typical ones. So that's what you're going to use those PPP funds for. 75% of the money spent should be used for payroll costs, 25% for other costs.
So this one relates to retirement plans and the PPP. And so question, if PPP money is received and my office is shut down with staff on unemployment, can I make a profit sharing contribution or a contribution to a cash balance plan and have it help with PPP forgiveness and count towards the 75%?
Yeah, so here's my take on that. First of all, we know that the retirement plan costs are part of the 75% or payroll costs. We know that for a fact. What we don't know, and I think you'd have to ask your banker, but I think you have to be paying your employees. So if you're not paying your employees, well then how are you basing your retirement plan contribution on it other than, oh, well, I'm going to put some money away for them because they had wages prior or they have wages coming up? I think it's got to be based on the wages that we're paying now. For other speakers say retirement plan match. So they're talking about the match and not necessarily, a cash balance plan and so on. However, when you read the law, it just says retirement plan monies, any retirement plan money. So it doesn't say match necessarily. So a little unclear there. I think that's a question, again, for your banker. I think if you watched my webinar, last one anyway, about PPP forgiveness, I stress that a lot. Talk to your banker about that. I would say the same thing in this situation. But my own take on that is that I think you have to be paying wages in order to have a retirement plan, whether that be the safe harbor amount or whether I'm paying it as a portion of their wage at that time. If I don't have any wages, I really don't think you have any retirement plan either. So I think the two have to go together, but I would definitely seek counsel from your banker who's going to make that ultimate decision.
Mike, don't you think that, I mean, and as far as the retirement plan goes, there may be a difference in how they handle it with regard to an employee contribution versus one that's benefiting the business owner, right? It seems like maybe the SBA would be more apt to interpret forgiveness more favorably for those contributions benefiting employees versus the highly compensated business owner potentially.
Yeah, I think that's true. And if we think about the intent of the payroll protection program in the first place, it's all about retaining employees and keeping them working and providing for them. And of course, we had the $100,000 amount for highly compensated people that was limited to the $100,000. So I do believe that that it's really meant for the employees, and so we'll see. There's going to be more guidance on this down the road, but I wouldn't start making a whole bunch of retirement plan contributions. You certainly could. And then if you find out that it's not going to be part of the forgiven amount or it reduces the forgiveness portion considerably, well, then you got a loan or you pay it back because you've got the cash in order to pay that money. You just pay it back to the bank at that time when the 8 weeks are done and they finally figured out here's the amount that you will have to pay back. You can either do it right then or you could accept the loan and pay it over a period of 2 years with 1% interest. Either way, I think you're fine. But so whenever it comes up, can I do this? Well, you can. Whether or not it's going to be forgiven, that's a question for your bank. Ben, what counts as payroll costs?
Yes, we touched on this a little bit earlier. Payroll costs include salary, wages, commissions, tips, employee benefits, including vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave, state and local taxes that are assessed on that compensation. And then, like we said, for a sole proprietor or independent contractor, wages are capped at $100,000 on an annualized basis for each employee.
Right. That's both not only sole proprietors, but in the cases if they're an employee in a corporation as well. Should the PPP funds be viewed as a loan or a grant?
Yeah, I think we want to view that as a loan, and then what gets forgiven is a grant. But I think you want to kind of frame that in your mind as a loan.
Yeah, I think just the opposite. Quite honestly,
Oh, really?
I think the money right now is a grant. That's what it is. The money came to you. The government's given it to you. It is a grant, and you use it as the money you use it as the government money. So they say to you, Ben, here you go. This is your money, or this is not your money. This is our money. You shall use it for these specific purposes. Then at the end, we'll tally up, and then there'll be a loan. So while we're booking it as a loan on the books and so on, it's really a grant and it's a program. So it's not forgiven. I mean, if you think grant is forgiven, well, no, it's not forgiven until that determination is made by the bank. But it's, if you think of it as, is it the government money or my money? It's the government's money until that loan is determined, and now it becomes my money.
Right.
Number 9, can we make staffing changes after the 8-week period?
So you can certainly make changes to your staffing mix after the 8-week period. We just think that what bankers are going to do is they're going to look at the activity both during the 8-week period and after, and that could have an impact if dramatic changes are made after that 8-week period.
Number 10.
So does the PPP cover paid sick leave?
Yes, the PPP does cover paid sick leave. So if you have to pay an employee a sick leave or the vacation time that they have coming, you can certainly do that just like you would under normal circumstances. The only situation we have a little bit different than normal would be is if your employee is receiving sick paid leave or sick leave or the paid family leave under the FFCRA Act. The Family First Corona Relief Act. If that's the case, then that does not, I mean, it'll subtract from the amount that you get forgiven under for payroll, because you're going to either get that forgiven or you're getting the credit from the FFCRA for the wages that you paid in that circumstances. So you don't get both. All right, number 11.
So you've got a staff member who's refusing to return to work once you're back open. If that person remains on unemployment, will it potentially impact my PPP forgiveness?
Okay, so I think this question really begs another question, and that is, why is the employee refusing to work? We really don't know the answer to that in this situation. But if an employee is refusing to come to work after you open, then it could be viewed as though they're voluntarily terminating their position with you, right? So in that case, I'd make sure that I talked about that with my attorney. I would notify the UIA, let the unemployment agency know that you're back to work, that these employees should be looking for work if they're not coming back, and or not getting their benefits any longer because they refuse to come back. So then now they voluntarily quit. So I would contest the unemployment benefits with the UIA if it continues, but you have to let them decide that, right? So you inform UIA, you tell them that I'm back to work now, and I've asked my employees to come back. I've got some employees who will not or are refusing to come back, and of course you got to be careful about the reasons why and such. So I want to make sure that if you have that situation, that you do talk to your attorney about it. But in any case, that's the general direction I'd probably take. And then will it reduce the forgiveness amount? Well, yes, it likely will impact your reduction amount. So we'll have qualified expenses and then the amount eligible for forgiveness, right? As long as I've got 75% spent for payroll and 25% spent for other things, I'd have an eligible amount. Then the banks are going to go through a computation, which we said we don't have a lot of clarification on yet, but they'll be looking at the FTEs during that 8 weeks and prior, and so there will be a reduction. Now, if there's a reduction on that and that person didn't come back, and you didn't pay that person, you didn't even pay anybody else, maybe you had to get somebody else, well then you paid them, and that'll work out to your work in the FTE calculation. But if you didn't and they just stayed home, well then you didn't use that money, you'll have it left over, you just pay it back unless you want to keep it for your loan. So I think it should be fine. It's just more about, I think, if that person is refusing to come to work, why? And then saying to them, hey, you know what, I think well, I know you are. By not coming to work, you're voluntarily quitting. And most people would say, no, I don't want to do that. Well, then, okay, get back to work because we got things to do. And that speaks to the communication with your employees, making sure you tell them why it's really important for them to be at your office and helping out during these times of crisis, and maybe afterwards now that we're open again.
Right. So it sounds like just having an honest conversation with the employee and then the UIA, and ultimately the UIA will determine whether that employee is eligible for benefits based on facts and circumstances.
All right, number 12.
So how should we break out a non-qualified expense that is part of a larger qualified expense? So I think this person's asking a question about PPP money and how to break out a qualified portion and then the non-qualified piece.
Right. So in the situation of CAM, typically the common area maintenance is paid out different times during the year, or maybe at the end of the year, separate from your rent. Some people have it where they're paying their regular rent and and their CAM is the same every, a portion of it is CAM every pay period or every month they pay that. I personally, I would put the full amount in there at this point in time. And then I would put the invoice or the lease out there for the bank and let them look at it. If you want to stick to just the base rent, which is what I think is the really amount that's going to be part of that PPP amount, that's, there will be banks that interpret that differently. Everyone will. But if you want to just take that amount, all you got to do is pay the bill like you normally would in the checkbook. And then when you put it on the PPP tracker, just put the amount that qualifies, and then we'll make up the difference and put it in the right account for you. Next question, Ben, when does the 8-week period start?
Yeah, so this 8-week PPP period begins when the funds go into your bank account. So as soon as that money hits your account, that's when the 8-week clock starts.
Right. We had a question as well on this, and it might be good to talk about that here as well. But when do the expenses start? And that's really the 8-week period starts the day you put the money in your bank account. So those expenses would count at that point too. So it's the next 8 weeks after that. So if you had payroll, 2 days prior to that, and then you got the money, well, that payroll 2 days prior to that doesn't count. You just start counting your payrolls when you pay them in the next 8 weeks. And we assume that if everything goes as planned, you will have, during that 8-week period, probably 4 payroll periods. Okay, so hopefully that'll work. And if not, then we'll talk to the banker. You'll have to talk to your banker about, hey, I want to put some more in here. I want to pay this. And that's why I paid it, was because I wanted to make sure that the average paid was the same amount in that 8-week period. But more than likely, you're going to have 4 payroll periods during those 8 weeks.
Right, and that kind of goes to what you were saying earlier, where we just think bankers are gonna look at those time periods and see, if you've got a bunch of extra payrolls during the 8-week period, they're gonna look deeper into it and try and figure out if that was really incurred and paid during that 8-week period, or was something else going on.
Right. All right. Number 14, Ben. Should I notify the UIA when my office is back open?
Yeah, you're going to want to let them know once you're back open. And what happens then is most offices that are closed pursuant to the executive order are on a temporary shutdown right now. And so once you let the UIA know that you're now open and operational, it's going to require staff that are collecting unemployment to then start calling and verifying that they're out looking and available for work. So you want to make sure that the UIA knows that you're back in operation.
Number 15, can I pay my PPP loan earlier than 2 years?
Yeah, there's no prepayment penalties, and you can pay that as soon as you want. You could pay it immediately after the 8 weeks if you want, if you end up with a loan, or wait. But yeah, there's no prepayment penalties. So if I used the EIDL grant to pay myself a wage, can I also use the PPP money to pay myself a wage after the $10,000 grant is depleted? This sounds kind of like that question we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it does. And I think sometimes it depends on the facts and circumstances, I guess, because we don't know if this office necessarily that asked this question, if it's just, a sole proprietor, or, what's the situation here. But I mean, if we think about our typical client with employees and so on, and maybe doctor was just working in the office, could they use that $10,000 grant to pay him a wage? Yes, you can. That is part of it. And then you would use the PPP money. However, like Ben had said earlier in one of the questions, the EIDL grant, if you use it for payroll purposes, will impact the forgiveness amount, at least from what we can tell. And again, that's something that you'll want to talk to your banker about. I would try to use that EIDL money for anything other than payroll at this point, based on what we know, and then and go from there.
Taking out an EIDL grant, can I still get a PPP loan?
Well, as of today, you wouldn't be able to apply for another PPP loan just because last week, Thursday, the funds dried up. Those that are still in application, obviously, could still get their money. And Congress is talking about the extension, we'll call it PPP round 2. They're going to have some different qualifiers. We were listening a little bit to Senate before we got on this call today to talk about this stuff. And so, you can apply for a PPP loan if you have an idle grant. Many clients have, but right now we're in a situation where now you'd have the idle grant, and then you wouldn't be able to apply just because the money's run out. But prior to the money running out, yes, you could have an idle grant and still apply for the PPP loan. What you couldn't necessarily do is get an idle loan and then accept those loan and then use the funds would have to be used for something totally different. You just got to keep the funds separate. So it might be better to use the PPP money, and then if down the road you want to get an idle grant because you still need it, fine, then we can look at that. Number 18.
If I took out a PPP loan, can I also take advantage of the employee retention credit, or the ERC?
Yeah. No, not really. Once you receive a PPP loan, you don't qualify for the ERC. We're keeping an eye out for clarification on whether or not you'd be able to take this credit after the PP program has run its course and you're using your money again. Could you then go use the ERC? That's an unknown at this point, and hopefully we'll see some clarification on that. But for now, we're assuming that you would not qualify to receive ERC based on the fact that you are getting PPP money. If, however, you haven't gotten the PPP money, and I have clients that are in that situation, then I think it makes good sense to take advantage of the ERC. And if later on if it's a client who didn't get any PPP money, tried but just couldn't get through the banks or whatever, was stalled or just didn't happen, well then I would say take the ERC. If you do get the PPP money, then they'll have a process that the secretary will have to give us direction, but probably some of it will have to be paid back or just pulled into the calculation. But in the end, it doesn't matter because you'll have gotten the ERC or you have gotten the money for forgiveness, and either way, it's the same, but they won't let you use both at the same time. So,
right. So it sounds like that. Yeah. It sounds like you're saying the ERC makes sense for those that don't have the PPP loan and they're paying wages, right? Because you got to be paying
wages. Got to be paying wages. It's got to be during a time of shutdown, or it has to be in a situation where you look at your receipts and you're down 50% over last year.
Right.
All right. Next question, number 19, Ben. We received a substantial payment from the HHS Provider Relief Fund today. Our PPP application is still pending. The question is, are we able to do both, or will one cancel out the other?
Right. Yeah, you can do both. So recipients of funds from the HHS are not precluded from participating in the PPP or other forms of relief under the Paycheck Protection Program.
Correct. It does have, the HHS money does have different qualifications as far as what you can use the money for, but you certainly could get PPP money and HHS money. And like we said at the very onset of this webinar, that we're putting out trackers for that to help you along as well. So you just want to make sure you follow the guidance that was put out by HHS. And if you're not sure what that is and how that has to happen, we just recommend you talk to your healthcare attorney about that as well. All right, number 20. Ooh, this is a long one, Ben. Don't fall asleep on me.
All right.
Here we go. I've qualified for the PPP funds. Since my staff have all started receiving unemployment compensation, Should I have them continue their unemployment and consider my PPP funds essentially a loan, since I will have no payroll until the office starts up? The alternative is to start employing them before I'm seeing patients and basically pay them with my PPP funds for staying at home. What are your thoughts for all of us whose employees are collecting unemployment? Since there's no work for them yet, we have qualified for PPP funds, which are intended for payroll primarily.
Yeah, so relates again to that question of, I'm closed, I got PPP money, how do I put it to use? And our thought on that is rehire the staff when you've got work for them to do. If a portion of the forgiveness is reduced on account of the computation that the bank later does, then you've got a loan, and it's a loan under pretty good terms. So that's our thought on this. We feel like the PPP money is for payroll when there's work to be done. Otherwise, the unemployment benefit's substantial, and it just feels like that's where those staff should be when there's not work for them to do at your office.
Number 21. The start date, let's see, no. Does the tracking start the date after we receive the money or the date we cease to be working? Example, we didn't work after 3/23/20, but didn't get the money until 4/15/20. So is the date I'm supposed to be entering the expenses in the tracking sheet 3/23 or after?
So the date's when the money hits your bank account. So you want to be looking at your bank statement and see when those funds hit the account, and that's the date you want to enter on the tracking spreadsheet, and also the date you want to use to begin your 8-week period.
Right. Just remember, look at that tracking sheet. When you put the date you received the money, 4/15, it automatically calculates the 8-week period. So it'll show you 4/15 through the 8-week period. Those are the times that we'll want to see the tracker down below. If you put something in there before then because you had payroll 2 days before, or you paid rent 2 days before, that's not going to count towards our tracker. All right, Ben, how do I enter the payroll transactions into the PPP tracker?
So Joe does payroll, and she's going to be entering a lot of this data into the tracking spreadsheet. So it's not something that you need to worry about when we do your payroll.
Right. Most of the time, we'll be entering all those transactions into that PPP tracker. There are some clients, however, that do their own payroll. And if you have questions about that, just simply, it'll be the gross pay. So whatever the gross pay is, that's what's going to go in there. And then we're just going to have to make sure that if employees are receiving compensation in excess of the $100,000 for the period, if you were to annualize it, right? Figure out the amount for those 2-week periods. I mentioned that in the prior webinar, the amounts, I think it was like $8,333 or whatever that a month. So if we get it to that amount, we just have to limit that, okay? And then it would also include your state unemployment tax. But for the most part, we're going to enter those in there for you. But like I said, there's a couple clients that do their own payroll.
Okay, question 23, Mike. I don't have a scanner. How can I upload a document using the link within the tracker?
Yeah, at the last webinar, I think I mentioned that it makes sense to go out and buy one. They're not all that expensive, but if you don't want to go get one, this is a way that you could do it. A client of ours actually mentioned it, and I thought, yeah, that does work. And that is, if you have a cell phone, you could either take a picture of it, or some of these, on my phone anyway, I have an app. You can go on iTunes app, or even the Android apps are out there that allow you to do capture a picture. So it's almost like doing a scan with your phone. You could scan it, you then email it to yourself, download it, and then upload it to the PPP PPP tracker to the files that we have on there. So it's a little bit of a process, but you don't have to go out and buy a scanner if you want to use your phone and your phone works. Just make sure it's that you can clearly see it and it's very legible, or otherwise the bank is going to be asking you for that information again.
In the near future, can you explain how the EIDL $10,000 grant can be spent and how it must differ from PPP money?
Yes, so the near future is right now, and we were kind of talking about that earlier, right? So we're going to have a tracker for the EIDL money, just like we have a tracker for the PPP money out there. And if you go to your new practice portal and click on your PPP tracker, you'll see that tab in there now. And so you'll put in the $10,000, or if you got something less than that, I know if you have a smaller office, they were issuing the EIDL money now based on number of employees. So if you had 5 employees, the most you're going to get is $5,000. So you'd put that in there, and then we just stick to the same type of expenses that are eligible for the PPP as well, and that tracker will show those on there. And as we talked about that earlier, it probably makes most sense to use that money, that EIDL money, for something other than payroll. What if I only need staff back half-time? Currently, they're getting unemployment, including the extra $600. But let's say get started and I really only need to bring staff back half-time just because I'm not busy.
Yeah, and that's going to happen, and you can certainly do that. And I think what you want to be mindful here of is when you've got staff that are both getting paid and collecting unemployment, if the compensation you pay them during a week is greater than 1.5 times their unemployment benefit, then you're going to eliminate the dollars they're getting from the UIA entirely. And we know right now that's a significant benefit amount. So what you want to do is if you are bringing staff back half-time and you know they're collecting unemployment, is you may want to have a conversation with that staff member to understand what is their weekly benefit amount and make sure you don't exceed 1.5 times that when you're paying them.
Right.
Because really,
it could jumble them up, right?
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I learned recently is, so you've got the typical state of Michigan unemployment benefit, and then as part of the CARES Act, there's the additional $600 of federal money. And in order to get that $600 of federal money, all that staff member needs is $1 of state of Michigan unemployment benefit. So what could happen if you just barely go over that 1.5 times is you could inadvertently eliminate all $600 of that federal benefit for that staff person. So I think if you find yourself in this situation where you're bringing them back half-time and they're also on unemployment, is have that conversation, know what their weekly benefit amount is, and then make sure you don't exceed it by 1.5 times. So questions related to timing of payroll and how to pay within your 8-week PPP measurement period.
Yeah, we had a lot of questions, and I, go through all the examples, but it was, anything from, well, what if I do this, or I have this situation? I don't remember them all, but it was all based on timing of payroll. Well, what if I get to the end of my 8-week period and I didn't, have the full amount in there? Can I add one more week in there? And all of those kinds of questions. I just think, as we've been saying all along, is that you should pay your expenses in your payroll just as you normally would. We don't recommend that you accelerate your expenses, and you just pay them how you normally conduct business. And so that a utility bill comes due, I'm going to pay it. I'm going to probably pay that twice during the 8-week period. When I have payroll, I'm going to have payroll periods. I'm probably going to have 4 payroll periods during that time. And that's really what we have to look at, is just looking at the typical way of doing it. We anticipate that the lenders, your bankers, going to compare the expenses, looking at the information, saying, why did we have so much in the month of, in the 8 weeks? So we're going to go back and look at that and probably make some adjustments if you don't. So, and question always comes up, can I do this? Well, yeah, you can. Whether or not the bank's going to allow it is another question. So I just say stick to the normal course of operations and pay the bills as you go.
Right.
So I think, is that the last question?
Yeah.
It is. Ben, thanks for coming on and doing this with me.
Yep.
It's helpful, and we wish all of you the very best. We'll be looking for additional information on the SBA coming forward. We're trying to look for other ways for clients who haven't gotten the PPP money to take advantage of the employee reduction credit or retention credit, rather. Also looking at ways to look for other types of grants and loans that are out there. Yesterday, I received from a client that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce had something, so put that out to a couple people that I knew didn't get the PPP loan and needed some money, and said, hey, why don't you go check this out and see what happens. We'll also be watching the Senate in Congress as they work on the issue with the second round of PPP. So until we see you again, have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.